Hello friends, today we are going to discuss about Testamentary Capacity Assessment. I am Dr. Suresh Padadmat, Professor of Psychiatry working at Nimans, Bangalore. Before I start my presentation, I would like to have a disclaimer. This presentation is for academic and training purpose only, not an alternate for legal opinion. If you want to have a legal opinion, please do contact an advocate. Conflict of interest? None. In this video, I am going to discuss about the definition of capacity, component of assessment of testamentary capacity, procedure of assessment, documentation, and interpretation. The stakeholders who are going to benefit by watching this video are psychiatrist, neurologist, neurosurgeon, medical practitioners, patient and family members, advocates, and judges. Let's understand what do you mean by testamentary capacity. All human beings are born free, autonomous, and equal. They can decide how they want to dispose their property or else how they have to be dealt during their life. That means they have a right to self-determination. Let's understand the decision-making capacity. Although everybody has self-determination, but they need to have the decision-making capacity. As for the definition, if a person can demonstrate the understanding of the situation, appreciation of the consequences of their decision, and reasoning in their thought process, and if they can communicate their wish, that means they have a capacity to decide themselves. Let's understand, if a person has capacity, that means he can enter into any valid legal contract. That means, in the eyes of the law, he is a valid legal person. Now let's understand the legal process. First, the capacity is assumed unless proved otherwise. That means the law by default, it says everyone has capacity. And if somebody challenges it that Mr. X doesn't have the capacity, the onus of proving will be on Mr. X. But at the same time, if there is suspicious circumstances such as proof of testamentary capacity is questioned, the onus would again be on the propounder to explain them to the satisfaction of the court before the will can be accepted as genuine. This is very essential because many a time the persons with dementia or else neurological illness or even a person with mental illness, during their life, many persons in their family may take the signature or else sometimes they may even take the left thumb impression on the will. In such a scenario, whenever a person is suffering from mental illness or else dementia or else neurological illnesses which impacts their thinking process, and if the will is executed at that time, it becomes invalid. In that process, if the person who is challenging the will says or is able to produce a proof that Mr. X was suffering, then the person, the beneficiary of the will, needs to prove that the will is genuine. That means the shift of proving will be on the propounder. Let's understand the testamentary capacity qualities. The important quality is the person who is executing the will is called as testator. He should be of sound disposing mind and know what he is doing by making a will. What is the impact of the will? To what extent he has the property? And he also should be aware of the beneficiaries and be aware of the consequences of his or her decision, and to be free from undue influences or coercions. So these are the important qualities of testamentary capacity. But however, if a person is suffering from mental illness and his illness symptoms do not come in the way of executing the will, that means the will is considered as valid in that situation. Assessment also needs to account for language barrier, communication barrier, and also lack of information and physical status of the person. Language barrier. Imagine if a person is unable to understand the language of the will written, a person who speaks Hindi and the will is in English and he is unable to read the English will, that means there is a language barrier. Communication barrier. If an elderly person has hard of hearing and the conversation is unable to understand, there is a communication barrier. Lack of information. If an elderly person does not have the information what is the worth of his property or the value of the property, the lack of information. Physical status. If a person of dementia is in a vegetative state and is unable to see or unable to write, in such a scenario, any will is executed becomes invalid. Before you enter into this testamentary capacity assessment, you need to answer certain questions. Let's go through them very fast. First and the foremost, do you have sufficient expertise in assessing testamentary capacity? You may be a doctor, you may be a specialist, but do you have this quality and the expertise in assessment of testamentary capacity? Do you have enough of information about the legal test or the principle applied in testamentary capacity? Do you have enough of information about the testator's illness? Are you specialized in that illness the testator is suffering from? Do you have enough of information about the testator's extent of the estate, value, and potential beneficiaries? Do you have a good medical record department? Because you may execute the assessment of testamentary capacity now. After 10 years, the will may be challenged. Then this medical record plays a very important role. That means if you are going to do a testamentary capacity, you should have a good record keeping behavior. At the same time, are you ready to be witness in the court of law if the will is challenged? These are the simple questions you should answer. If you are able to answer, please proceed further. The scenarios for testamentary capacity, there are two. One is the assessment is done now and prospectively the will is executed. This one. The second scenario is retrospectively the person has already written the will. Now it is challenged. And now you as a doctor has to say that the will when it was made, the testator was in the sound mind and whether it is valid or not. Unfortunately, you may not be able to examine the testator because he is no more. So prospectively it is very easy. Retrospectively it becomes very difficult. Hence, for the retrospective purpose, the law in many of the countries requires two witnesses to sign along with the testator so that the witnesses can say what was the physical condition and mental condition of the person who is executing the will. We are not going to discuss about the retrospectively. That scenario is very difficult and it by case the court decides. We will discuss about the prospectively if the will has to be made and you have a patient with dementia. How you are going to help them? Let's discuss that. What are the prerequisites? First and the foremost, take a written request from the patient or patient lawyers regarding the need for assessment. That is basically why the will is executed now. And if the person is of sound mind and also he is able to give a consent, please do take consent from the person. Ask for the government issued ID of the testator. That is very essential. Ask about the review previous treatment details. At the same time, if you are able to get hold of the previous wills, please take those. You have time for proper documentation and please do go through the number of assets, the property and the market value of those property. Record the patient response in verbatim. If possible, if a patient is able to write, let him write whenever you ask questions. Let's understand the setting. The setting, should you do it in OPD or inpatient? If it is your old patient and you know the diagnosis, you have the medical record well established, you have done almost all investigation, He is under treatment with you since maybe 5 to 6 years. At time, you can do the assessment in OPD. However, if a new case has brought in front of you for testamentary capacity, in such a scenario, it is the professional discretion and also the professional capacity, whether you want to do OPD basis or inpatient basis, is left to the individual professional. Let's see how the assessment is done. First and the foremost, do the detailed evaluation of the case, and also know what are those signs and symptoms which can come in the way of decision making. Please review the whole treatment details. Do proper investigation. Whatever the suspected nature of illness, those investigation has to be done, including radio imaging. Once you arrive at the diagnosis, if the diagnosis is coming in the way of decision making, please initiate the treatment. Postpone the testamentary capacity assessment and also executing the will. That is very essential. Please do advise, can you postpone the execution of will until the person is treated? But in certain scenario like dementia, it is incurable. In such a scenario, you may have to continue with the assessment of testamentary capacity. Suppose if a person with mental illness and he is in a lucid interval, please go ahead with the assessment. If the patient is severely ill, but will needs to be executed now, and it is incurable, please go ahead with testamentary capacity. Let's now look into the assessment of testamentary capacity. First and the foremost, after detailed evaluation, do a thorough general physical examination, mental status examination, cognitive function, mini mental status examination. At the same time, after doing these things, specific assessment of testamentary capacity has to be done. First and the foremost is know the nature of the will, whether the testator knows the nature of the will, effect of making that will. At the same time, whether he is able to name all the properties and assets he has, both mobile and immobile properties, shares, money, bank accounts, how much he has, whether he is able to name them. And also, he knows whether the approximate value of each property, it need not be exact, approximate value is able to tell, it is excellent. And also, if the will is executed only for the specific part of the property or else to the whole property, whether he is able to understand that. And also, does he know the natural beneficiaries of the property? At the same time, those who might expect to get the benefit of from the tester's will. One is natural beneficiaries, but the beneficiaries of executing the bill may be completely different. Reasoning why certain people are included in the will, why certain people are excluded in the will. If he is able to give the reasoning, that means he has a reasoning power also. And also check for whether he has delusions, hallucinations, any mental ills, signs and symptoms which can come in the way of decision making. And also check for coercion. This is very essential, especially in dementia or in geriatric cases. You need to ask all the family members to go out of the examination room. And then you have to talk to the person who is executing the will, and do you ask him whether is there any undue pressure on you to execute the will in certain way. If that is the case, you need to call off and say the person doesn't have capacity, and you need to take appropriate action. If in doubt about the capacity, seek a second opinion from another experienced professional. And at the same time, if the person is found to be having capacity to execute the will, do the assessment before the execution of the will, and preferably on the day of examination only. If they are able to execute the will, it becomes highly valid. And at the same time, doctor can be the witness for the will by signing on it. But however, I, being a professional, I would like to request my medical professionals not to be a witness. This is my personal opinion. Be a professional expert in examining the patient. Signing as a witness, I have my own reservation. To conclude, my dear friends, testamentary capacity is a capacity to make a valid will. Do a proper assessment, document each step. Assessment requires time. Keep this in mind. And also ask certain questions, whether you have a requisite expertise, Do you have time? Do you have proper documentation recording? And at the same time, if you are in doubt, take the second opinion. And also prepare thinking that this will is going to be challenged in near future and document properly. Thank you very much for giving your valuable time. Stay safe.